The Power Factor Show with Rick, Steve, and Caleb. Episode 63.
You can find this podcast and others at Gun Rights Radio Network, gunrightsradio.com. Podcasting freedom.
Brought to you by Safariland and Hodgdon, the gunpowder people.
Oh, I'll start tonight. Welcome to the Power Factor Show. I'm Caleb.
I'm Rick.
And Steve is shooting shotguns at things. So tonight we're going to be doing the Reading Rainbow version of the Power Factor Show. If you're about my age, you'll probably get that joke. If you're younger or older, it's pretty much...
Right.
Really? Reading Rainbow? PBS?
No.
Oh.
No.
Hosted by LeVar Burton, a.k.a. Geordie LaForge from Star Trek The Next Generation.
I remember LeVar from...
Roots?
Yeah, Roots,
oh,
exactly,
man.
yeah. So I'm like a decade early, probably.
So anyway, half of you are going to get that joke, the rest of you aren't. Anyway, we have a lot of books. For whatever reason, there's been an explosion in the shooting community of books lately. We've got books about the shooting sports. We've got books about the business practices in the firearms industry. And we've got a book about a gun that no one owns.
That's kind of both. That's both.
And I had another book at home that I was going to bring about gunfighters, but I forgot.
I had another one that I forgot as well. The Gun. Have you read that one by AK-47?
Actually, I have. Yeah, I've got that one.
We can review that in the next episode.
And I have one, an old book called Trigonometry, The Gallery of Gunfighters. It's Trigonometry, yeah. It's about all like the old school cowboy gunfighters.
Oh, cool.
It's actually it's a very neat read.
Like, is it a scientific kind of analysis thing?
It's more of a historical point of view, like the stuff that you don't see in the movies. Like, it talks about Wyatt Earp and, mentions that he was kind of an a-hole some of the time.
Yeah.
Like, a big a-hole, apparently.
I like those articles that Ayub writes, where he takes these historical gunfights and kind of puts them in modern context, like kind of a scientific analysis of it. Those things are pretty cool.
And they're absolute money for generating reader mail, because the internet will just... Everything about this article is wrong.
Right.
Awesome. So,
Where do we start?
Let's start with a book by a friend of mine that is actually in my opinion, a really great primer for getting into the shooting sports. This is Shoot by Julie Golub. And why don't you tell us about what's in here?
Well, it's... I didn't really know what to expect. I hadn't really read anything. I hadn't read any reviews of it on Amazon. Until after I read it. It's actually, what I would say is that it's very much like the first 20 or 30 episodes of the Power Factor Show in print form, because it's like a kind of a primer to get people introduced to the different shooting disciplines. And in that respect, I thought it was great. I mean, although I read it really sort of just to review it, the book actually belongs to a buddy of mine. I was interested in some of the shooting sports that I've never participated in, and Julie outlines everything in terms of what kind of equipment do you need, what are the different levels of matches, like are there national championships, are you likely to find local and regional matches, and it was pretty informative, and I thought it was written, again, one of the other things I wasn't really, didn't really know what to expect was the writing style.
Yes.
Was it going to be kind of like an arrogant, here's you poor sap, how you do it, but she actually comes across as kind of big sister kind of way that I thought was was appealing.
Well,
anybody, whether you're a tough guy or a woman maybe who doesn't have any shooting experience at all, it comes across as a pleasant conversational writing style that I thought was really appealing.
Having worked with Julie on some projects before, I felt like the writing style was a good reflection of her personality. She comes across with that very much, even when she knows a lot more about a subject than you, it's never when she's explaining it to you or helping you out. She was a big help with me when I started shooting Bianchi Cup, for example, and I never once felt like I was being talked down to or that I was dumb or anything. And I think the book does a very good job of presenting subject matter that is very simple. The basics of action pistol and the basic, a DASA gun.
Right.
These are for people who have been in the sports for years and years. This isn't a complicated thing for us, but for someone who has just walked into a gun shop and bought their first .22 and now wants to do something more with it than play on the range, I think it's a really great resource.
The other thing I noticed is it is printed on really thick paper.
It is really nice paper. Like the production values,
Yeah, I mean, as I was reading it, I kept thinking I was flipping 2 pages at a time and kept going like this, trying to separate the pages, and I looked at the numbers and realized, that's just one page. Yeah, so it's really, really well done. The photographs, which apparently it looks like her brother shot most of the photos in the credits here. The photos are good, illustrative of what she's trying to... Word for the day, illustrative. What she's trying to illustrate. I mean, some really good pictures of equipment, and that follows along with the text. One thing I commented on earlier that I noticed is that just about every picture is of a product made by one of her sponsors, which brilliant marketing strategy. And her sponsors do make good stuff. Mm-hmm. So that's not really a complaint, just an observation.
I'm not gonna lie, if I could get my hands on one of the 6-inch 952s, the single action kind of third gen Smith model that they make, oh man, those are crazy good guns. But they're also like $3,000. So
most $3,000 guns are pretty good.
Yeah, funny story about that actually from the 10A performance class going on at West Coast Armory. A friend.
Another little product placement there.
Sorry.
No, it's all right.
Sidebar.
It's all right.
So Rick just said that most $3,000 guns are really good guns. A friend of mine had a 1911 built, from the ground up on a frame by a well-known 1911 gun maker. And he takes it to the 10A performance class, and they're checking all the guns out, and they go to lower the slide, and the hammer goes forward to the half cock notch. And I'm like, so you paid upwards of 4 figures for that gun, and it has hammer follow.
Yeah, not good.
That's kind of sad.
Not good.
So sorry for the segue, but back to shoot. I think one of the most interesting things about the book again is that it goes into subject matter that I don't pay attention to. Shotgun sports. It even covers Olympic bullseye and stuff like that.
All kinds of stuff.
And so it's a really neat resource, again, like I said, for if you walk into your local gun store and you buy a Ruger Mark III, the target model in 22, you can pick up shoot, flip through it, and go, there's a sport in here for my gun. Mm-hmm. If you buy a Glock 19, pick up shoot, flip through it, there's a sport in here for my gun as well. It covers all the bases, and while it may not dive into super duper detail on any one given topic, it is very much this is sort of like the, I'm going to dip my toe in the pool before I see what the water's like. I'm not going to do the full cannonball right away.
Yeah, and I not to be sexist, but I would say especially if you're trying to get a lady friend involved in shooting or shooting sports, and I'm sure that was, I doubt that ever crossed Julie's mind when she wrote the book. But it's really, I think the fact that it is written by a woman would make it more, accessible and appealing for women shooters. Yeah, exactly. Like if I wrote the book, I don't think any women would read it.
Well, and you give a girl a copy of Brian Enos's book, and she's like, "Why is this dude from 1982 with his big yellow Ray-Bans talking to me?" And it's the Enos book is a great book, but it's a very deep book, and it's not something that you want to hand someone who's trying to find something to do with their new gun. So again, I think Shoot's a great book, and it's one of those books. The production values are nice, so you can put it on your coffee table, and people will be like, pick it up, and they'll flip through it because it's got, it feels nice. It's those big, thick pages like you were talking about.
I'm going to read a passage. I don't know where. Let's go to the USPSA or IDPA.
Because that's kind of our comfort zone.
Then I'll sound like I know what I'm talking about.
Hopefully.
Okay, here we go. This is the chapter on the United States Practical Shooting Association. USPSA is the governing body for IPSC in the United States. Even though USPSA is a member of IPSC, the organization has developed additional rules, especially with regard to equipment for competitors in the U.S.
And targets.
Where IPSC has 5 divisions, USPSA has 6. There are no set course requirements for USPSA matches as there are in IPSC with regard to stage size and the formula used for the number of stages in matches. Though there are several differences, USPSA and IPSC feature stages of fire that are constantly changing and test the shooter's ability to maneuver through a course of fire while shooting both fast and accurately. Many of the primary rules, especially with regard to safety and scoring, remain the same. Of the modern action shooting sports in the United States, USPSA has the most members. We should check that.
I was actually just on a call about that.
I have heard from a little bird that there are actually now more IDPA members in the United States than there are USPSA members.
I don't know how many USPSA members there are, but I know how many IDPA members there are.
I mean, I remember when USPSA hired Michael Bain as kind of like a rainmaker marketing guy 10 or 12 years ago. Even then they were saying we have almost 20,000 members. And they're still saying we have almost 20,000 members. And IDPA has been climbing the whole time, and they're on par, let's say that. Okay, back to the story. The sport has an extensive network of clubs participating in the local, state, regional, and national championships, including the classic target used exclusively in IPSC. USPSA events also use another paper target known as the metric target. The metric target is humanoid in shape and has 4 scoring zones. Courses of fire also commonly feature the use of pepper poppers, similar in shape to classic poppers in IPSC. So it's just, it's very plain English. It's not highly technical. There's certain phrases that are, pepper poppers. If you've never shot USPSA or IPSC, you wouldn't know what a pepper popper is.
It's a metal plate. You shoot it, it falls down.
Yeah, but it's in here. The information is in here, and so, and she'll actually have little kind of sidebars with lingo, like defining little terms or little shooting tips, and that I think is also interesting, especially if you're reading about a shooting sport with which you have no familiarity, which a lot of this stuff, Olympic sports and the shotgun sports, I don't really know anything about them. And so it's nice to have these little sidebars by somebody who apparently does know about them to kind of give you some insights into either equipment or little tips on how the sport is run, operated. So I thought it was worthwhile compared or in contrast to some of the reviews that I've read elsewhere.
On Amazon,
perhaps? For instance, yeah. I'd say, for as an intro to the shooting sports, I think it's really pretty well done. And I would recommend it, if you've been shooting for any period of time and you're not looking to kind of expand your horizons, I think maybe then the value isn't quite there. I mean, I would if you're trying to expand on what you're already familiar with, I'd look somewhere else, a little more advanced level of description or instruction on what you're already doing. But if you're really looking for an overview that kind of gives you a little look into all the various shooting sports, from the types of facilities that they use to the equipment and the rules and whatnot, I think it's actually pretty well done. So, some of these, like this scorecard format, I'm going to just show it up on the camera here. I just kind of glossed over that. I never really bothered to try to figure out what it was meant by it. I mean, I couldn't tell for the sports. I guess what it came down to is for the sports that I didn't already understand, I couldn't figure out what the scorecard was supposed to be telling me.
Ah, okay.
And then on the sports that I did understand, I still was kind of, like guns and gear. It says single firearm sport. Well, USPSA has multi-gun, so it's not a single firearm sport.
But you're not in USPSA.
Well, no. I'm just using it as an example of a sport that I am familiar with. I was then trying to correlate the information on the sports I was familiar with the information in the sports I wasn't familiar with to try to kind of increase my understanding of how to use this scorecard format, and it never really clicked. And that could be my fault. I'm a little daft sometimes, so maybe it's my fault.
I think the thing that sticks out the most for me is that it reminded me of a 101 textbook. And I mean, in more ways than one. Like when you pick it up, you're kind of like, you have a little bit of college flashback maybe when you pick it up. So again, if you're looking for information on getting started in a specific shooting sport, I can definitely recommend Shoot by Julie Gallo.
Yes. Okay, the second book we're going to review is Glock, The Rise of America's Gun. I was going to say a little something about it, but there's not a single photograph in here. So I'm going to let Caleb talk about it.
Now, Rick, this is an uncorrected proof, not for sale, but I have the print copy. There's no pictures in that either. Sorry. So, Glock the book is written by Paul Barrett, who is he's been writing for Bloomberg Business Magazine for years and years and years, covering the firearms industry. And the book is actually started off as a collection of articles that he wrote for Bloomberg about the company Glock and how they came to prominence in the U.S. Now, I have to give some disclaimers here. I actually know Paul. I sat down with him on a couple of occasions at SHOT Show and before that to talk about the book, and I was given this for free to review. So I just want you guys to know where I'm coming from on this and know that, I think Paul's a nice guy despite the fact that he works for a terrible scumbag in, Mr. Bloomberg. And you can tell him I said that. The Glock the book is not what I expected it to be when I picked it up. I thought it would be kind of one of the usual fluff pieces that we get in the firearms industry about, Glocks. This is how they came into the country. This is why they're so great. And, all these things. You can freeze them and then hit them with 1,000 hammers.
They never malfunction.
Exactly.
Hundreds of thousands of rounds without a malfunction.
They do. But what it actually is and what makes it interesting is because it's written by someone who is an outsider to the firearms industry. In the book, the author talks about going to Florida to train with Masayub and Gale and shoot an IDPA match with them.
Even though he was not really a shooter.
Even though he wasn't a shooter, yeah.
Okay.
So he wanted
cool.
to get to know the culture. And where I met him was actually at a gun bloggers event out in Reno where he was coming to sit down with people who write about firearms and are passionate about it. So he spent some time while writing and after publishing the book getting to know the gun culture, which I thought was an admirable thing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he didn't spend quite enough time doing it before he wrote the book because there's some stuff in here that will drive you absolutely bug nuts if you know about how the business of selling guns works. That's a small market, and that's something that got hashed out in my blog. But the book itself is honestly a very interesting read. He draws most of his sources from interviews with former Glock employees, as well as depositions and legal documents.
Any former Glock employees we know?
Not that former Glock employee.
Okay, continue.
More at the C level of Glock employees.
Okay, all right.
What's really interesting is he talks to former Glock employees, gets a lot of information from court documents and depositions and legal documents and that sort of thing. Which, the reason why we say that is you have to bear in mind that if much of your information comes from former employees of Glock, they may have an axe to grind with Glock.
Sure.
And as a result, there is some information in the book that is not complimentary towards Glock. Some of the stuff that pops up in here about Glock's business practices, about their, penchant for strip clubs in the greater Atlanta area, how Gaston Glock was a fixture at a particular strip club in the greater Atlanta area. Things like that pop up in the book. Yeah. Now, while you're taking all of that with a grain of salt, because the source is a former Glock employee, another fun factoid is that at SHOT Show, Glock requested to have the author's press credentials removed so that he could not attend SHOT Show as a member of the media. So, 1 plus 1 kind of makes 3.5 in this situation.
Yeah.
But regardless...
So no love lost between Mr. Barrett
between
and
Mr.
Glock.
Barrett and Mr. Glock, there is no love lost.
Right.
There were a couple of people when I was at SHOT Show that suggested it would be hilarious to get a Rascal scooter and just load it up with copies of this thing and then just tie the throttle down and drive it straight into the Glock booth with no one on it, which would have been really funny, but I had nothing to do with that whatsoever. But back to the book. It's hard to review a book like this because the information that it contains spans everything from the creation of the Glock automatic pistol, the how Gaston came up with the idea, who he got help from, and all of that, all the way through the assault weapons ban, Glock's role in actually defining what the assault weapons ban would look like in the U.S. and how they interacted with Smith & Wesson during the great Clinton sellout of the Smith & Wesson era. There's a tremendous amount of fascinating information here from the back rooms that a lot of gun owners don't know about. So I can absolutely recommend that you buy this book and read it. You may not like it. The author comes to some conclusions that I disagree with. At the end of the book, he's talking about things like how he thinks a 10-round magazine limit is a perfectly reasonable suggestion, and I think that's
reasonable
effing retarded.
Yeah.
Effing stupid. Can't say retard anymore, apparently.
Right.
But overall, I really do think it's an interesting book. I think that people who don't know kind of what goes on behind the scenes in the firearms industry will enjoy it. I think that people who like a good tale of corporate espionage and kind of crazy CEOs and attempted murder, you may or may not know that somebody actually tried to whack Gaston once.
Yeah, that's not good.
Somebody actually hired a hitter to whack Gaston, which they obviously failed, but, fun things. It really, It really, like I said, it's really an interesting book. I mean, it's one of those reads where you expect it to be really dry and boring and full of like, well, then their profits in 1997 were X, and so they did Y. But it actually has a good narrative and is a fun read. I don't really know, what else we can say beyond that to recommend it. But
Well, I'm going to read a little passage of it. How's that?
I like this idea.
Let's see how this goes.
Actually, wait, here, hang on. Let me find a really fun one.
Find a good passage.
Yeah, all right. So I'm going to find a good one. Here, entertain them for a second while I do something. The shootout in Miami. Oh, yeah, he does set the stage with the FBI shootout in Miami, which is a little tenuous connection, but Glock goes to the White House. Ooh, here we go. Yeah, chapter 17. An assassin's attack. Oh, actually, no. One of the interesting sources for this book.
Kaboom is the name of a chapter.
How many people? I mean, you've read the Gun Zone, right? Dean Spears' site.
No.
He's the guy who chronicles all the Glock kabooms.
Oh.
So
I'll have to call him.
Actually is a source in here. So let's see. Container cases, blah, blah, blah. Glock's blowing up. No, that's not fun. So let's go with start there and just go for it.
Okay. The Glock legal files describe a suit filed by Jeffrey A. Gueno, an Air Force captain who badly injured his right index finger when his Glock 21 .45 caliber, quote, exploded in his hand, unquote. Gueno, an experienced firearm user who was practicing at a range...
He was in the Air Force. How experienced could he have been?
Well, maybe he practices on the side. Quote, alleged that Glock placed on the market a product in defective condition which is unsafe for its intended use, unquote. When confronted by such cases, Januzzo?
Paul Januzzo, the former legal ninja at Glock.
Okay. Januzzo had one overriding initial objective. He told me, quote, get the gun, unquote. The company lawyer made sure that Glock recovered the supposedly substandard pistol for examination and, if the case were to be settled, destruction. He did not want faulty Glocks being passed around and possibly photographed to the detriment of the manufacturer's reputation. The company's inspection of Captain Gueno's Glock attributed the accident to the plaintiff's ammunition rather than his pistol. Quote, there was no indication of any obstruction having been lodged in the barrel, unquote, the file states. Quote, the damage to the pistol was caused by an ammunition failure-related problem, unquote. Ammunition can fail in several ways. A batch of rounds may be poorly fabricated, leading some to disintegrate. Shoddy ammunition may jam as it comes from the magazine to the chamber or from the chamber to the barrel. Chamber to the barrel.
See, and now I got to stop you there.
Yeah.
That is an example right there of how the author is clearly not
a gun guy.
Because a gun guy would have been like, what?
Yeah.
Like we just...
Right. To save money, some gun owners, quote, reload, unquote, ammo. Check out one of the earlier episodes of Power Factor Show if you'd like to see about reloading. It's a 3-part episode, like 20, yeah. 20, 23, 24, 25 maybe. Using to save money, some owners reload ammo using basement hand crank machines. It makes it sound
that sounds really legit.
You're out in the barn with
with your banjo and your reloader.
Yeah, you're down in the basement with your hand crank machine to insert new lead bullets into spent brass cases they collect at the shooting range.
Or FMJ bullets.
It sounds like those, like in Monty Python when the people are collecting filth.
I honestly don't remember that passage, but if I must have just been like, haha, silly reloaders.
Right. So unless it's done expertly, reloading can lead to problems. Glock explicitly voided its warranty if the customer used reloaded ammunition. Yeah, well. So
that's actually a really good example of how the whole book goes, because it's got information in there about Glock that people may not have known. Glock's number one rule: if there was a blown up Glock, get the gun back, destroy the gun. Right. Never happened. Yeah. That sort of thing.
Well, but it's not bad. You could say they're being secretive and they're trying to hide defective guns, but I suspect Ford destroys. When they've got a lawsuit involving a car that's got some kind of allegedly has some kind of an issue, they might want to destroy the car too.
I think one of the things about the book is it's a lot like the Bill Maher Show on HBO. So you get a lot out of it what your biases were coming into it. So if you think Glocks suck coming into this book, and you think that Glock is, just a terrible organization full of horrible monsters, then you're going to come out of this book just hating them right up off the ground. If you think that Glock's a corporation trying to make a buck and they make a mechanical product that fails sometimes, you'll come out of this book thinking that they were definitely trying to make a buck and were extremely successful at making a buck, and they make a mechanical product that fails sometimes.
Do they ever explain that wacky grip angle?
Actually, yeah, they do. Back in the beginning of the book,
good.
What they did was they tested a bunch of hands.
Austrian hands.
Austrian hands.
I think that's the key to it.
Men and women, though.
Okay.
And determined that the grip angle of a Glock is the ideal angle to present a firearm in a two-handed isosceles grip.
Right. Now, how many cops and IPSC shooters are Austrian women? That's my question. I think they got their target audience wrong.
I think the grip angle is just fine, right?
Yeah, well,
I like it.
I'm just saying. We
could have a whole episode on that. Although, funny, I do have a Glock for replacement frame that has a 1911 grip angle. But if you're looking for an interesting read about the history of the firearms industry and one of America's most prominent companies, regardless of industry, Glock, The Rise of America's Gun by Paul Barrett. It's available now on Amazon for like $15. So go for it. It's a good book. All right, so the last book that we're going to review is called Bren 10, The Heir Apparent. And I have not read this book. As a matter of fact, I never heard of this book before tonight.
There's pictures in it.
This is Rick's book, and I'm not going to lie. The pages are a little sticky. I don't really want to know why, but I'm going to let you talk about your 10mm CZ there.
This is actually one of my favorite gun-related books. I'm on my third reading, as you can see from the dog ears here. It's led a kind of a rough life. The book was written by Ronald Cirillo, and the premise of the book is that...
Is that him on the back?
That's him with the Colonel.
Man, he looks like he must have been 12 years old when that picture was taken.
But the premise of the book is that in the late 70s, the military was casting about looking for a new sidearm. Colt had been going through various reorganizations and whatnot for a number of years. They hadn't sold a 1911 to the government for 30 years, and that some new gun was going to have to kind of take the place of the 1911 as the standard heavy-duty combat pistol. And
that gun was the Beretta M9. The end.
No, heavy-duty. Yes. So the story is of a company that was formed by a couple of buddies in California, and their dream was to build a new service pistol. And they decided at the time that in order to kind of get some street cred for it, they would involve Colonel Jeff Cooper, who's here pictured with the author on the back, and that the Colonel, by kind of acting as a technical consultant and inspiring the design of the gun, would lend some legitimacy to an endeavor much like this one that in the firearms world didn't have any legitimacy. And so the Colonel had decided, this was about the time that the CZ75 pistol had been discovered in the Western world, very difficult to get. And even though Cooper wasn't a fan of the 9mm cartridge, he liked the design of the gun and thought if it could have been chambered in a more serious cartridge, it would have been a great gun. And so the two gentlemen who were involved in the design and development of the Bren 10, Tom Dornhaus and Mike Dixon, they decided that by basing their pistol, although it's based on a number of different guns, they went out and bought a Browning High Power and some different guns of that era. We're talking the late 70s.
So no good guns.
The real basis for the design was the CZ75. And they essentially blew the gun up in its proportion so it would accommodate the 45 ACP cartridge. They hand-built a prototype pistol, took it out to Cooper, and Cooper said, hey, this is great, but you need to chamber it in a 10 millimeter cartridge.
Get more bullets in there.
Yeah, and of course there was no 10 millimeter cartridge, so Dornhouse and Dixon had to design that as well. And the gun was then kind of re-engineered to accept the smaller cartridge. And these guys were literally starting from scratch. They had no experience as gun designers, although Tom Dornhouse had actually worked as a gunsmith at Pockmeyer and was involved in the development of the Combat Special, which was a very popular IPSC gun in the 70s. Ray Chapman shot one. I mean, it was very, one of the kind of early custom combat guns. And so he had belonged to the Southwest Combat Pistol League, and so he had some insights into gun building and design and practical pistol competition. Put all that into the design of the gun along with Cooper's input, and the Bren 10 was born. Even the name of the gun was Cooper's idea. The Bren being, he thought, kind of alluding to the Czechoslovakian origins of the CZ-75. And
what does Bren even mean?
Brno, B-R-N-O, is a city in Czechoslovakia where Cooper thought the CZ-75 was made.
But it wasn't.
Anyway, sort of like the Bren gun, the British light machine gun that was based on a Czechoslovakian design. It was called the Bren. He thought, I would just read the book. Anyway.
I actually will.
Yeah. So it's these two guys. They had no real experience as businessmen, no real experience as gun designers, gun builders.
Obviously.
They didn't really know anything about, they had some ideas about marketing, manufacturing not so much, engineering not so much, but they went in the span of about 3 years from having like an empty office and a little bit of money to cranking out a new gun and a new cartridge. They talked a major cartridge manufacturer into manufacturing a cartridge, brand new cartridge, for which there was only one gun that it could be fired in. So you just read along, and it reads, it's kind of an amazing story from beginning to end, whether you're really a gun person or not. Just kind of like the almost naive, kind of wide-eyed way they went into it, but the way they stuck to it. And within 5 years, although the company was kind of in grave financial condition the whole time, they cranked out about 1,500 of these pistols, and Cooper approved of it, and it's a very interesting story. And I'm on my third reading of the book. When I was a kid, and I read a lot of gun magazines, not that I don't read them still, but certain guns kind of fired my imagination, and the Bren 10 was one of those. And so it's one of those guns I've always wanted, but I never really thought I would ever have one, either because they're too expensive or too rare, or some suggest that even if you have a rare and expensive Bren 10, you shouldn't shoot it because it might fall apart.
It might.
Yeah, it might. And once it does, then if you can't come up with spares, and the spares are in somewhat short supply, then it's just a really expensive broken paperweight. So I actually bid on a gun broker auction I bid way too much, and almost thankfully didn't win the gun. But there's an heir apparent in that Voltor, which is a company mainly known for AR accessories down in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona area, they've been kind of dancing around reintroducing a sort of a product improved Bren 10. They announced it initially. I was at the 2008 SHOT Show. They had some kind of plastic engineering models there. I'm not sure what the material's called, but it's plastic for those of us that don't know about technical materials. And I just thought, boy, if they come out with a new Bren 10, that'd be really cool. Well, of course, that was 4 years ago. We're still waiting. So I just read this book to kind of, bide my time waiting for that gun to come out. But it's an interesting book. I mean, the Cirillo, I'm going to call him Carrillo.
I would go with C-A, probably Carrillo.
Yeah, Carrillo or Carrillo. But anyway,
there's no. All right, so I'm going to read a passage out of this book.
Oh, okay.
We're going to flip the script here on you guys.
Do I get to choose? Okay, I'm going to choose a little passage.
The Bren 10 actually influenced the first self-defense handgun I bought. So when I was a kid, I read gun sites that had the Cooper's Corner in the back.
Right.
And he used to wax poetic about how awesome the Bren 10 was and how much it sucked that, they were never able to produce it. But if you could get a handgun in 10 millimeter, you'd be doing very well for yourself.
Right.
So the very first carry gun I ever bought was a Glock 29 in 10 millimeter.
Right.
And it was all Jeff Cooper's fault that I bought that gun.
Right.
So,
okay.
You got a good one in there?
Start, let me see here.
And there's pictures. Ooh.
Yeah. Okay, start with Dornhouse said engineers.
All right. Dornouse said engineers used to gain ideas from the products of their competitors. The pistols included a Colt 1911A1, a Teutonics Combat Master, a Beretta Model 92, and possibly a... Really? I love the 92. And possibly a Llama... Really? And possibly a Llama 1911 style 45.
To see what you could do with an all-cast representation of a real gun.
Dude, you can bend the slide! They also closely examined Dixon's Browning high-power P35 and a SIG P210 at a local gun store. The goal was to study these guns and determine what design features were the best of the best and blend them with even better features derived from either Cooper or the minds of Dornouse and Dixon into one handgun. By December of 1979, Dornouse had quit his toolmaker job, one he found utterly boring, and started working full-time in his garage on the gun project. Over the course of the next 2 weeks, Dornouse disassembled one of the Czech pistols and carefully studied and measured its double-action trigger mechanism, a feature Cooper insisted on incorporating into the new design. Dornouse also conducted hardness tests on the second CZ75 and on some of the other guns using a Rockwell hardness tester. He wanted to achieve a hardness on Cooper's gun at least as good as the Colt 1911.
Right, Cooper's gun. Isn't it? Cooper's gun?
Yeah, no, it is. It is actually in quotes. Yeah. How much of this do you want me to read?
That's enough.
All right.
Just kind of get an eye for the writer's style. You know.
I think the most interesting thing about this for me is that Cooper insisted on the double action trigger.
I think that's very interesting too.
And one of the lasting memories that I have of the Cooper's commentaries in the backs of the old Guns and Ammos was one where he was talking about you shouldn't bring a pistol to gun school, aka gun sight, at the time that cannot be manually cocked, have the hammer manually cocked. And obviously you could with one of those, and that was very clearly, talking about Glocks in that particular thing. But I always thought it was fascinating that Jeff Cooper is like, no, there's nothing wrong with DASA pistols. You just got to learn how to shoot them.
As long as you can carry it cocked and locked. And
right, exactly.
And that was one of the things I think that was, Cooper, I think, later in his life, he had something of a reputation as being kind of dogmatic. Mm-hmm. He decided what was right and what was good, and there was no change in his mind.
He did also invent modern pistol shooting, so I can give him a pass.
But the thing is that early in his life, I think he was thought of as a real innovator, and that he accepted that things were better than others based on a demonstration of their superiority.
Right.
But that once he kind of had this formulated in his mind of what was best, it was very difficult to convince him otherwise.
He also didn't get old, too.
And the DA trigger was something that it was sort of like the answer looking for a question. And he called them crunching tickers because the initial double action pull was usually very heavy and gritty. And he was not a big fan of double action. And yet, when his gun was being designed, I think he probably recognized that that's the wave of the future. That's the way things are going. If you want a gun to be adopted by a military or a major police department, it's going to have some sort of double action capability. So I think that was evidence that he was still open to change, accepting, that their market forces were going to determine whether the gun was a success or not necessarily whether he liked it or not.
Right. But you know what's sad? The closest thing today on the market to a Bren 10 is an EA Witness in 10 millimeter. And if you're that desperate to simulate the Bren 10 experience, just buy the first season of Miami Vice and a Glock 20, and you'll have a 10 mil, and you'll be able to watch a Bren 10, and you'll be way happier.
I've actually, while waiting for my Voltor Bren 10 to be released, I've actually contemplated getting a Witness, but I've read very little good about it.
If you get like a Wednesday one, it might be good, but you get like a Monday one, and it may just blow up.
Right. So anyway, if you're interested in the American gun business or the evolution, one of the interesting things about the Bren 10 is that IPSC competition very, very heavily weighed on the design of the gun. Is
that why we have major and minor power factors?
If it were a result of this, major power factor would be about 230. But a lot of the design of the gun, the ergonomics and whatnot, were very much based on the modern technique. Whereas most guns that were designed before that were all shot like this, And so it really was a modern gun in a lot of ways, and in a lot of ways, it followed kind of the form of the time, but then it's still pretty cutting edge. I mean, you look at other than the fact that it's all metal, if it were made today, like Tenfoglio makes now, and CZ as well makes plastic framed versions of the CZ. And if this gun had a plastic frame,
I don't know if Tangfo makes a plastic frame 10 mil though. I think all their 10 mils have a steel frame.
Exactly. And I actually asked. There was a CZ rep out here at our IDPA match in August, demonstrating a bunch of pistols, and I asked him, could the CZ97 be featured in 10 millimeter, because it's essentially their large frame version of the CZ, big enough to accommodate a 45 cartridge, which was essentially one of the interesting things about the Bren 10 is it was actually originally a 45 caliber pistol called I think it was called the Combat Service Pistol 80 or something like that, because it was designed and built in 1980. But the original design, when they designed the gun, the guys assumed that Cooper would want it in a 45. And so it was actually a CZ blown up to accommodate a 45 caliber cartridge, and then they kind of diminished all the internal dimensions of the bore and the breech face and whatnot to accommodate the smaller cartridge. But yeah, it was.
So could you blow up a CZ97 to shoot a 10, or blow it down? I guess.
Yeah, it would be the same process. I mean, if the exterior of the CZ97 will accommodate the 45 caliber cartridge envelope, you could just reduce the size of the bore, reduce the size of the breech face, and in so doing, it was kind of interesting. That was one of the interesting aspects of reading this book, is that essentially you make the gun stronger by maintaining the external dimensions and shrinking down the internal dimensions.
More metal.
You're essentially adding metal back to it, and that was the really how the gun became a 10 millimeter, was reducing the internals of the gun and thereby strengthening it so it would take the higher pressure cartridge. And the development of the 10 millimeter cartridge is part of the story, and that's probably the most fascinating part.
Yeah, I would be very
because
interested in that.
It's interesting that how much the Bren 10's development parallels the 41 Magnum revolver development. You had some people, in the case of the revolvers, guys like Bill Jordan or whatever, that wanted a harder hitting gun than a 38 Special, but they didn't want it really big and heavy. They didn't want to go all the way up to
44 Magnum.
So they suggested, let's have this kind of in-between cartridge that fires a pretty big bullet, rumbling along at a moderate velocity. But then what they got was a gun that I think in foot-pounds of energy was even more powerful than a 44 Magnum, and the gun was as big as a 44 Magnum, because you couldn't get a 41 in a medium frame.
Right.
It was only available in the end frame. So it didn't really gain anything. And the 10 millimeter
41 Magnums are cool. If you have a 41 Magnum, you are a baller.
Buddy of mine's got a Model 58, which was the service pistol version with the fixed sights and stuff, and they are pretty cool. But the same problem was with the Bren, in that the cartridge, as Cooper envisioned it, was supposed to be a 200 grain bullet at 1,000 feet per second.
Right.
But by the time Norma got done developing the ammo, it was a 200 grain bullet at over 1,200 feet per second, and it essentially had all the same downsides that the 41 Magnum had 20 years earlier. So it's a very interesting book. I highly recommend it. If you're interested in the gun biz, or like a handgun that just never quite made it, even though it maybe had some promise. And so enjoy Bren 10 Heir Apparent.
If you liked our book reviews, let us know on Facebook if there's anything else you'd like us to review. There's some obvious choices in the shooting sports, but try to think outside the box. Books about guns, maybe they're good, they're bad, or they're written by a British person and they don't know what the hell they're talking about. So if you want to send us a book to review or some information on that, send us an email at
powerfactorshow@gmail.com,
or hit us up on Facebook at facebook.com/powerfactorshow. Thanks for watching, guys.